The Synchromystic presents Synchromystique. As of this recording, tomorrow is the 2024 presidential election day. It's also the anniversary of the so-called Gunpowder Plot. The Cliff's Notes version, eminently questionable, is that said bombing plot, ostensibly hatched by disgruntled Roman Catholics, was directed against Protestant English King James I and the Parliament, November the 5th, 1605. Independent researcher Michael Hoffman has written a provocative piece on this history and the crypto history. What he produced is much more than what we can hope to do presently. His discussion, which we recommend to you and which is available on his Substack, also includes many research recommendations. By the way, if you're interested in Hoffman's work, please use our referral link. What we want to do is promote Hoffman's general insight about the synchronicity of the date, so that you can consider it yourself on this, the eve of the quadrennial U.S. election. But we'll begin by sketching Hoffman's stated reasons for his interest. First, there's the apocalyptic rhetoric being slung around, as, for example, when Elon Musk opined that this would be the last election if Donald Trump is not elected, or when Trump himself stated in various places, including a campaign ad, that if Kamala Harris were elected, we won't have a country. In other words, and as we basically stated in our video on 1968 Sinks, the buzz is that we are standing at some sort of historic crossroads. Hoffman comments that the original Gunpowder Plot was similarly commemorated throughout England for centuries in what became known as Bonfire Night, or Guy Fawkes Night, similarly commemorated, that is, as a historic crossroads. If this sounds a bit too British to be of relevance, Hoffman reminds readers of the 2005 movie V for Vendetta, featuring actress Natalie Portman and actor Hugo Weaving. The film made numerous references to Guy Fawkes and adopted the tagline, "Remember, remember the 5th of November." Moreover, the titular character, V, donned a Guy Fawkes mask, which, and this is the punchline, has, according to Wikipedia, subsequently popularized the use of Guy Fawkes masks by anti-establishment political groups, including those operating in America. In his usual penetrating manner, Hoffman proceeds to question the official story of the Gunpowder Plot, which, as mentioned a moment ago, pin blame on Catholic agent provocateurs. Implicated in the revised version, at the very least, would be Sir Robert Cecil, son of Queen Elizabeth I's important advisor, William Cecil. We briefly touched on the intrigues of the Cecils in our video on the so-called Cities of Gold. Hoffman further observes that there's long been occult undercurrents within the institutional Catholic Church, going back at least to Renaissance figures like Marsilio Ficino and his patron Cosimo de' Medici, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, Lodovico Lazzarelli, Johannes Reuchlin, Johannes Trithemius and his disciple Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, Cardinal Egidius of Viterbo, and many others, some of whom, incidentally, we've also covered before, for example, in such videos as 10 Secret Adepts, as well as in our deep dive on Neoplatonism. To Hoffman's analysis, we will only now add a few odds and ends. For instance, the Dutch-born William of Orange landed in England November 5th, 1688, precipitating the Glorious Revolution, quote-unquote, whereby James II was deposed, and the former, as King William III, took over with his wife, Mary II. As far as I can see, the first U.S. election to be held exclusively on a November the 5th was the one that occurred in 1872. Ultimately, so-called radical Republican and former Union General Ulysses S. Grant won his bid for re-election. This was despite a split in the Republican Party, in which so-called liberal Republicans ran newspaper editor Horace Greeley, who received Democratic support. The date, November 5th, 1872, was also notable because women's rights activist Susan B. Anthony cast her vote on that day and thereby played a role as a suffragette. Anthony was fined for her efforts since women didn't get the franchise until August 18, 1920. When Congress ratified the 19th Constitutional Amendment. Incidentally, that amendment was passed while President Woodrow Wilson was incapacitated by a stroke. Wilson's second wife, Edith, assumed many of the responsibilities of office. Questionably, we'll add. We explain much more about this episode, including the possible involvement of naval intelligence, in our video 1968. Woodrow Wilson himself had initially been voted in November the 5th, 1912, following the Republican Party's internecine war between between Theodore Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. On this, see 10 milestones in election fraud, as well as presidents who were in secret societies. Similarly to the Republican splits in both 1872 and 1912, there seems to be yet another rift in 2024. Neocons and warhawks such as George W. Bush's former Vice President Richard Bruce Dick Cheney and Weekly Standard founder William Bill Kristol are endorsing Democratic candidate Kamala Harris as opposed to Republican Donald J. Trump. Another November 5th occurred in 1940 when Teddy's fifth cousin, Franklin D. Roosevelt, was elected for an unprecedented third presidential term. The latter Roosevelt, widely referred to as FDR, would go on to win a fourth time 4 years later, only to die in office, leaving a New Deal legacy that would last for the next 30 years until around the time of the next November the 5th election in 1968. For a summary of the significance of the Richard Nixon presidential era, see our previously mentioned 1968 vid. William Jefferson Blythe III, or Bill Clinton, won his re-election during the November the 5th election held in 1996. And that brings us once again to the current year, where, again as stated in our 1968 video, Trump stands to be the second president of the United States after Grover Cleveland to be elected for a second non-consecutive term. By our quick accounting, November 5th contests have occurred every 28 years since 1912, with a previous in 1872, as noted. Possibly apropos of nothing, Jewish Kabbalists celebrate a ceremony to bless the sun every 28 years as well, although we hasten to register the crucial caveat that this system operates on a different timetable. The last such blessing occurred in 2009, and the next one is due to occur in 2037. Still, 28-year cycles are interesting, and were evidently also a key feature of the Julian calendar, which was replaced by the Gregorian calendar in October 1582. However, 28-year patterns similarly show up in the Gregorian schema, but they're modified by a set of exceptions for leap years. We discussed some additional calendar miscellanea in our presentations on Cibola and the Four Corners area of the American Southwest, so we won't explore this anymore here. Except we will say that Russia's late adoption of the Gregorian calendar leads to some date variations. For example, the Bolshevik Revolution is often alternately called the October Revolution, even though, on the Gregorian calendar system, it happened in early November 1917. But as a parting comment, we'll note that Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, better known as Lenin, evidently called for the Bolshevik Revolution on November 5th, 1917.